part of the committee in the office. Other questions? Yeah?
Have you thought about expanding beyond the local community at all?
Actually, this semester, I have 2 student chapters that are attached to international organizations. We worked with, if any of you know Samita, a local musician, we worked with Musicians for World Harmony on the work of their foundation. So we have moved beyond the local area. I've also had several on-campus projects, and with ties into the community, but my mentors have been here on campus. And that is kind of a nice mix of having, thinking about community partner kind of broadly, how you define that. Yeah. That's worked out very well. Actually, Marion Brown is our mentor right now, working on the merger project with the 3 sustainability organizations. And she, of course, brings the Ithaca College component. She also sits on 2 of those boards, I believe. So, circles. We just keep finding each other, right? This community.
Yeah, I have one more question. So when the partners come to you, do they already, what's the scale of defined goals do they have when they come here? Do they come knowing exactly what they want or not what they want or something in between? And how do you guide them through that?
Yeah, I've worked all the way along the continuum. I've had groups come to me and say, we have a project in mind, we don't have the staff to be able to write a grant proposal, we even know what sponsor we want to submit this proposal to. And then we would serve more as kind of translators and ghostwriters. That's actually not my favorite kind of project. My favorite kind of project is the kernel of an idea and something that allows the students to engage in the development of the idea, and then help the community partner figure out how to bring other members of their organization into that process. That's my favorite model because that allows for deeper learning. The students are more engaged. When students serve strictly as ghostwriters or translators and everything is being handed to them, they start to back off in the process. They're just not as involved. The work is not as good. So I like that. I use that term, kernel of an idea, all the time with my community partners. And they get a little nervous. They're like, hey, we've got to, like the merger, this is a new idea. They're just, they really haven't thought through this. Do we share the same physical space? How do we bring our staff together? Are we going to be competing with each other still? That's talk about a learning context, right? All of that is just fabulous for that process. So yeah, that's a really good question. I'm really picky about projects. I'm really picky. I also, because I'm working with fund development, I tend to work with 501c3 organizations or an organization that has a fiscal sponsor and they're moving in the direction of being able to receive a grant. If they're a volunteer group and they're not in that position, it's really hard for us to create something for them that they can then use immediately. So I do try to work with that. I have helped organizations actually get 501c3 designation.
And in your head, what kind of criteria are you thinking about when you're evaluating partners and you're trying to be selective?
Yeah, I love to have projects where there are maybe 2 people who can serve as mentors so they can do a little tag team with each other because it is pretty demanding. I only have 8 formal project team meetings throughout the semester and then informal work that will go on. So I try not to overload the responsibility on the part of the community partner because you want their investment to really pay off. So if they feel like, and I've had early on, I had a couple people say to me, hey, this is way more than I signed up for. So I've had to back off from some of that, be careful with that. So 2 people is good, if there's a little tight. I try to get someone who is in a key administrative position in the organization so they can actually take the work that the students are doing and do something with it. So there I may be the executive director, for example. We're working with Immaculate Conception right now on an instructional technology proposal, and Don Mills is the new principal at Immaculate. He is our project mentor. And it's great. My students just came back from a visit to the school and they went, wow, they need some things. They need some stuff. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So pretty picky about that. So a couple people, a key person, someone who has a direct connection to the board. Other questions? Yeah.
So when you're assessing the student kind of response after the course,
yes.
Are they continuing to use what they've learned somehow? Are
yes.
they staying involved?
So I think the reason I have wait lists for this our students talk about how they took collaborative grant development materials. I actually have samples if anyone wants to look. And they actually use them in interview situations. I have a lot of creative writers who discover that, you know what, I can use storytelling as a development writer, and they're going into development work. I think they're surprised by this. It's a very marketable skill. When anytime anyone hears, oh, you actually know how to write a grant, and the students go, well, yes, actually, I do. And I can do it with a collaborative group of people. I actually think the collaborative writing feature is the other important piece of this. So the students are learning how to market these skills as professionals. Because I teach writing for the workplace, I also, my grant writers all develop LinkedIn sites, they create entries for their resumes. I mean, I'm trying to talk to them about professional development along the way and how to use that. The last piece, and you have examples of this in here, I think moving beyond a course grade is so important. My course is really not about a grade. My students forget that they get a grade. It's a collaborative, primarily group-based grade. 15% of their grade is individual. So a big chunk of their grade is collaborative, and that's a pretty complex process. But at the end of the semester, they have to pitch their projects. So they do it with a public audience. I try to bring as many local sponsors into that process as possible. And then I gather feedback from those sponsors about the effectiveness of the student teams, another form of assessment. And that form is actually in your packet. So getting not just the project mentors are saying something, not just the students self-reporting, but a group that actually would have these materials and this idea in front of them are saying, interesting, I'd like to know more, or I had some problems with the way they were trying to persuade me to pay attention to this project idea. So trying to make it as public, as professional, and involve as many of the stakeholders as possible is a part of it. And it's taken me 10 years to get there, folks, so don't get nervous about how do I kick this off. And there's still things I wanted, I went back over criteria and I went, gee, I think I want to change that, I think I want to. So I think as long as you stay engaged and it's still interesting and you still want to tweet, that's a good sign. I think that's a good sign, right? I'm trying to convince myself that's a good sign. Any other questions? How are we doing? We're out, right?
Yeah, so we can pass this out maybe at the end for the resources for the T1 piece.
Yeah.
So what we thought we would do, thank you, Pat,
Yes.
is shift over to get you to do another exercise. So for those of you that weren't here, or who were here, if you brought what you did last time, if you didn't, don't worry about it, I have extra copies. I want you to use this template again. This is a template we used in the first session. And it's just a way for you to structure an outcome beforehand, as Nancy mentioned. And then to really think about what are the activities that you're going to use that are going to foster that outcome. So typically those are reflection assignments or other kinds of assignments that you think will get at that particular learning outcome. And then, so the first column is the learning outcome. The second one is sort of what are the activities, the instructional design activities that you're going to implement that will get to that learning outcome. And then what evidence do you have to actually show that students have achieved or gotten close to that learning outcome? Do you think is a quality, high level of achievement? So I don't want you to do 5 learning outcomes, so just take one, spend some time right now, just a couple of minutes, and write out one learning outcome. What you see are the activities where you're seeing that outcome play out. What are some things that you're doing to foster that learning outcome in the course? And then what evidence do you have to show? And use this sheet as a way to think about some of the evidence that you might use. And then we'll just go around the table and see what you came up with. And then I'm going to just make some general comments about how to think about assessment pre, during, and post, which is really important, and that came out very clearly in Pat's presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then different types of reflection frameworks, and then rubrics. So we've got a lot to talk about. So maybe about a couple of minutes just crafting out those 3 columns, just one learning outcome. For those of you that got through the 3, could you share maybe just one learning outcome, some instructional activities, and then some assessment?
I don't know if I did this right, but I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, that's great.
I want to jump in just in case I have to leave before we're done.
Yeah, no
with the
problem.
student
Thank you.
meeting and taking exams, so my apologies if I walk out. It won't be because I'm mad at anything. Anyhow, I don't know what I'm talking about. But I would just trying to jump into like where I might do service learning. None of my courses seem appropriate at this point, but I was imagining I teach in religious studies, so the religious history of upstate New York was a class I was thinking about. And so I was thinking a particular learning outcome would be the ability to narrate the history of a specific religious group, local congregation, for example, was somewhere within the Finger Lakes, within the context of a broader regional religious history kind of thing. The instructional methods or service activities that came to mind might be lectures and readings on New York religious history, what I call spatial temporal mapping, so mapping with kind of a dynamic over time kind of thing, of showing when congregations pop up in relationship to other congregations popping up by denomination, for example. Oral histories of a particular local congregation members, for example, archival research into the history of that particular property and their relationships, perhaps with cemeteries is something I'm kind of interested in. Okay, and
I
then
was actually thinking of that.
and then moving toward the assessment side, you know, I think you write papers on that contextualized history of how this congregation is placed in a broader narrative. Story mapping is a particular tool that GIS technologies allow. Esri has some online stuff where you can build really nice story maps and post them to the web. That's a way to tell the story of a local place. And then I was just saying some kind of project files, presentations to community members that would return that kind of oral history and archival research to the community that wanted to. Am I in the ballpark? Am I okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like hitting a home run.
Yeah.
So really nice.
Especially the public presentation piece at the end. I was wondering where you're going to go there at the end. Like how do you return that? How does that relationship cycle back?
Right, and this is always easier with a congregation that exists, right? And there are some religious groups that are just not congregational, and that's just like so Protestant to say, right? But like, you know, Muslim groups do not have that kind of. They're in the landscape differently. I'll just say, right? They have different ways of connecting with one another that are harder to break into than here's a church on the corner. I bet they've got a minister I can knock on the door and ask a question on, right?
Yeah, there's all sorts of, it'd be interesting to do a visioning process, you know, around what might benefit the community partners that you work with or other, like, I was just thinking the History Center might be a resource, or you'd mentioned that software. Story mapping, I mean, you know, making that even public at some point, you know, to give visibility to the congregation and their work, and there might be service dimensions to that, or, you know, or what's the work here that they do around new media, what's it called? Project Look Sharp, thank you. You know, Project Look Sharp in terms of perspectives and stereotyping in particular religious groups might be really interesting to work with them. My wife worked with that a long time ago. Some things, particularly around Muslims, and so for high school students and how they view, unfortunately, some of the negative media around some groups, religious groups. So anyway, that's fantastic. Knocked it out of the park.
The visioning conversation, I think with the community partner would really help you as the, you know, as the instructor to really think about what's potential range here, where might I go? I think doing that as early as possible in the process would be useful.
Yeah, and I can already see, and there's a couple of things I want to hand out because something that you have to leave is some rubrics. So like I have for those of you who were at the first workshop, I put all the handouts for how to write learning outcomes and some of the verbs and other examples of the types of learning outcomes you might want to think about that are out there in the field. I put those out there so you can grab them. And then these are just some handouts that I want to get out there on rubrics. How many of you have developed rubrics? So some of you developed rubrics. Okay. I find there's sort of an art to it. It's constant revisions taking place, but here's a little handout on how to do them. And then a similar template for just thinking about a rubric, you know, practicing writing a rubric. And then American Association of Colleges and Universities has 11 rubrics that you can download. And these are sort of key learning outcomes, particularly related to high-impact teaching and learning. So and you'll see the rubrics and they'll make total sense: critical thinking, and intercultural competence, and civic engagement. That's just one to give you a sense. And what they did is to create those rubrics, they did Delphi studies, which is you ask the experts in the field what they think you should be measuring. And so they're pretty substantial rubrics that come from sort of scholars or experts around that particular area.
Relates to the scorecard. Do you want that to go out also?
Yeah, send that around. Another example or two while you're passing that around. Who else finished? Did you get a chance to finish yours? You want to share it, or would you prefer to defer to somebody else?
I can defer.
It's okay. I don't want to compel people, but if you want to share, that'd be great.
problem posing, solving, small and large problems, clinical experience, and then assessment will be presentation in front, presentation in front of community partners with subsequent feedback from. And this was for a course I'm thinking about adding a service component to my Ithaca seminar course, which is introducing students to culturally sensitive methodologies of community work with marginalized populations. So right now it's just like a basic introduction course and no service learning component, because I'm thinking, how can I get freshmen out into the community? And I'm just kind of building the relationships within the community.
I really like that. I love the fact that it's you're not giving them an already existing proposal, you're actually having them work on it as freshmen. So it even aligns, one thing about learning outcomes is it aligns with the population you're working with. So the senior, certain learning outcomes that you can expect from a senior, but for a freshman, like actually even going through the process of negotiating with a stakeholder and not saying this is what you're going to do, because a lot of times students have an idea, I'm going to do this with the community. That's a really nice way of framing it. It gives them an experience of actually writing a proposal, getting feedback. And you can already see all the rubrics. A rubric for the community partners to provide feedback, a rubric on the presentation. So there's lots of really nice strategies, assessment strategies for thinking about that particular learning outcome.
And all the guided activities before you start this process.
Exactly, the case studies and really good preparation. That's that pre, during, post that I was talking about. Thinking about assessment and learning as a pre, during, post activity is really important in aligning those. And Pat's story, I think, really reflected the pre, during, post, what preparation the students need in order to actually get toward that learning outcome.
And I suspect as you start to tinker with your courses, the place that you're going to return to again is that pre-work. Because all of a sudden you'll have a situation where you go, I really should have talked about that before. So I found that the front loading in my course is really purposeful, and I actually delay the connection with the community partner for a few weeks in order to do that. It makes me nervous when I hear about courses that immediately jump right into that relationship. Maybe others can do that really well, very quickly. I can't. It takes me a little more focused time with my students in order to get to a level of comfort. Or maybe it's they need to convince me that I can trust them. That may actually be what's going on. But that seems also relevant to that. I'm going to just send these around, and this is related to the rubric conversation. So these are actually 3 different, they're called scorecards, and this is what the TEGAL Consortium Group created, and it's all tied back to best practice in service learning literature, etc., civic engagement literature. And so the first scorecard is actually for students. So this would be administered at the end of the semester, or you could actually administer in the middle of the semester to get a test of where you are. So there's one for students, there's one for instructors, and there's one for community partners. Now, we did pilot this instrument here at Ithaca College with just a handful of courses. My course has been through, I think, the process 3 different times. I found the information that I gathered from the pilot useful, but I actually find the scorecards more helpful on the front end for course design, and that's why I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to you, not saying this is the end-all, this is what we should use college-wide to assess the effectiveness of a service learning course, but more, this is a really effective way to think about course design and structure. So make sure you take one of each. They are different, and again, apologies to the forest. There is one other piece, and we've been working with a group of consultants from Vanderbilt during the development of this scorecard, and they created, it's called a key performance indicator. So they took the scorecards and they kind of condensed it all down to a simpler instrument. And Hobart and William Smith is currently using the scorecard college-wide for service learning coursework to evaluate, and they're talking about maybe trying out the key performance indicator. We as a college are in that process of starting some conversations around assessment and what might we do on a more of a college-wide level. So this is just another example, and what I like is it gives you a standard and then it asks you how many times you do something. So for example, how much how many times do you meet with community partners before the kickoff of the course? And it'll tell you kind of what is the standard, and then you put in your number and you see if you're high or low. So it gives you a little bit of a gauge, and I found it to be kind of useful. So.
I have a question about, so it seems like so much work to get this off the ground. Do you ever feel frustrated at the end of the semester where you've gotten it all going? You know, it took so much to get the momentum and to get the project moving forward, and you get to the end of the semester and you have to move on to the next group, right? I mean, do you ever feel like you want to just continue, and is there any way that you found to be able to continue?
Yeah, so a couple of things I've done over the years. I actually taught this course as a pilot for 3 years. It was not even a part of our curriculum. Now it is the capstone course in our professional writing curriculum, and it's a required course for 4 different majors. So I've gone from pilot to expectation, and it created a bit of a monster where I was expected to teach it every semester, and none of my colleagues were kind of on board. So it was just me. So I actually did spend a lot of time bringing another colleague on board and mentoring. So Antonio Dorenzo has actually taught proposal writing with community partners with a service learning component. He brings his twist to the conversation, which is more of a historical context. So he's still able to make it his own. So I think supporting others around you in the process, so you are not the keeper of this course completely, is important. I am teaching it twice this year. He's on sabbatical. I'm a little nervous about that because I am a little tired at the end of the semester, but I'm not like I used to be. I'm still engaged, I'm still feeling like I'm ready to do this again. Let's do this again. So I think it just you get smarter about the process, you get better at advocating that other people participate in the experience. Oh, and partners. I have 2 key on-campus partners in this process. One is Brian Saunders, wherever you are, Brian. I bow to Brian Saunders. He is an amazing academic reference librarian. He creates a web presence. All 4 of my projects have an extensive resource site. He comes in and he talks to students before they do the literature reviews. He's amazing. My other partner is Warren Calderon and Chris Bean in institutional advancement. My students actually work with our Foundation Center subscription. There's some guidance provided about how to identify sponsors. So I actually invite other people to be a part of my course experience. And that doesn't feel threatening to me, that actually feels comforting because I have other people involved and they really enjoy the process. So think creatively about who your other partners might be here on campus. And other faculty partners. And I'm trying to think of what else I've done. And returning to the same partner. I'm actually going to have some projects transition from the fall to the spring and pick up where we left off with a new team, but continue that grant development process. So that makes it feel a little more like I can do this again. This course feeds me. Every time I teach it, every time I hear from a former student, when I hear about the work they're doing, when I hear about a community organization moving forward in some manner, it feeds me. So it would be hard to walk away. I really could not teach the course in another way. I'm past that point. There's a tipping point. I'm past the tipping point. I just couldn't do it.
One thing I wanted to make sure that we discussed a little bit was just reflection and how important that is. You hear about reflection a lot. That's a huge part of assessment. And I find that very few people actually have studied what reflection is and what's out there. There's a lot out there, particularly in the service learning field. So one model that's sort of gotten a lot of exposure was developed by Patty Clayton, and it's called the Deal model of critical reflection. And it's one thing to think about is our students don't come into classes knowing how to reflect on their learning and how to articulate their learning. And so this is one framework that's very popular. If you Google, there's lots of resources around the Deal model, articles on how to use it. So you can get a lot just online. But it's probably, I would say, one of the more used rubrics that are out there. I think what's really important is to have a framework for reflection so you can assess it. So a couple of things that I want students to learn in almost every course that I teach is they should develop a capacity for describing things really well, for analyzing things really well, and for applying things really well. And so unless I give them some sort of framework to do that, it's not consistent. And so there's a couple of things that I've developed over the years that might be helpful. There's some things that I just grab whenever I see them. So one model I just call the what, so what, now what. And so what being description, so what analysis, and now what are you going to do with what you just described and analyzed, right? Who's it helpful for? In a service learning context, it's really important because if I'm doing work in health, for example, I can say, well, what would a health ministry use this information for that you've you spent so much time on? Or what would the recipient of this service, this health service, how would they understand or apply what you just generated? And so it's really important, and if they've done good stakeholder analysis and they've done the work beforehand, the preparatory work and on-site service work, they should be able to communicate that. So here's just something, this reflection formula. It's because I was thinking, well, what does it mean to describe things well? Right? It's sort of like that rubric. What does it mean to analyze things well? Because I've graded so many papers over the years, and it's like, well, this could be, the analysis section could be better. What does that mean? Sometimes I would say that differently every time. I'd use different criteria. So finally, I just wrote it down. And then there's a woman at Cornell who runs an employee service learning program that's pretty cool. Her students do tutoring with employees around English, computer literacy, and the GED. And so she's spent probably 20 years developing reflection activities. Her name's Jenny Steele. So she produced this really nice document that uses the what, so what, now what. And the deal model actually comes with workbooks that she's used with her students. And she's at the point where she's wondering if she's getting them to do over reflection. So it's a concern, but students will appreciate you when they're more meta aware of what they're learning. They learn how to learn. It's so important. It's a lifelong learning skill, and I can't tell you how much my students appreciate it afterwards if you really spend some time with actually helping them. And then there's one other thing I'll hand out I think is useful, is there's a woman on our campus who I think is really just a very reflective practitioner. She teaches a garden-based learning locally, and then also she's in the horticulture department, and then she does an international course. And here's a couple of rubrics that she developed. One is a participation rubric, so thinking very deeply about what does active participation mean. And then the other one's just sort of her final project rubric. And she sent me a whole binder of 22 appendices on stuff she's developed over the past 10 years. So if you're interested, I could probably share that in some way. But it's sort of like Pat, very immersed in how to make this, the most important experience ever. And then a couple of things that we talked about earlier about formative assessment, and here are some what are called CATs, classroom assessment techniques. So if you Google CATs, you'll get all sorts of examples. That's just sort of a summary.
Yes.
Of some of the things that you can do that just get students in the habit of reflecting, and prompts like during class, at the after 2 classes, after 4. If you're having them do weekly reflections, I find that's really important to get at that individual and the group dimension. So if you have a website or a web, whether it's WebCT or Blackboard or something, or Google Groups, Sakai, have them get in the habit of doing reflections, and getting that feedback is really important. And having those prompts that Pat mentioned,
I have one component to that.
Yeah, sure.
I've found that one way to help them be better at the reflection component is to meet with them as a group, and I call them debriefs. So after every component, the development of every component in my course, I actually sit with the team, and we go through a formal debrief process. And part of that debrief is actually, it's a reflection. It's a group reflection that we're going through, and they're kind of learning from each other in the process how to go about doing this. So I find that I get better written reflections when I go through this step first. For example, I just went through with a group that's working on the sustainability merger, and I had an environmental studies student say, this is the first time I've had, and she wrote the most beautiful overview about the core issue, behind why humans need to move forward to live more sustainable lives. I mean, just the most gorgeous piece of writing we've ever seen. And I said, what happened to you as a writer in that process? And she goes, it was the culmination of everything I've done in my major. This was the first time I've had to bring everything together in one place. And she goes, I feel like I've been writing this for 4 years. And I finally, the words just kind of fell out of me. And so as she was talking, the other students who were in different places with their disciplines and their majors and their expertise were really connecting with that. Oh, that's an exciting thing to have happen, right? And so she was finding her rhythm with her expertise, and she was also defining herself as a professional. Because she said, I didn't realize how much I really enjoyed writing. And, and now I'm practicing the writing part of my discipline. So I think we watched her kind of clarify her vocational goals as we were all sitting there together.
See people leaving, so I want to
No problem with that.
So I was just passing around the e-portfolio information that I mentioned. And really, one last thing I would say also, and I know it's time up, but e-portfolios are really now considered sort of the gold standard in assessment. And I don't know about Pat, but I've been using them for a number of years now. And the difference between reporting something in a piece of paper compared to reporting something in a portfolio, which forces that integration, which is key because they'll have a number of different products that are often you're using as assessment activities or assignments. They're not linking them together necessarily. They often just come as discrete. So you write a research paper, and how is that related to the text or the presentation? So they seem sort of discrete. The portfolio, you're asking them to distill from all of those products that they've generated over the semester and then integrate them and present them in some way and showcase them. This is the showcase aspect of the portfolio. So it serves as an archival feature, it serves as a feedback device, it serves as a reflective tool, and it also serves as a showcase. And there are a number of different platforms now of e-portfolios. I'm not sure if the college is...
We're now required, we're just starting.
What is it?
TaskStream.
TaskStream, okay, I'm familiar with TaskStream. We use Mahara and Digication are the two. But most of my students actually in my classes use Google Sites because it's free and it's a really easy platform. So I was amazed when Darren Cambridge came and presented what his students do, and that's that bibliography I asked that we put together. And then I incorporated them after seeing his presentation. At the end, it was unbelievably powerful to see how students integrate their learning. And it makes it so much more fulfilling when you see them reach that point, because sometimes you're just not sure. A test only gives you a certain amount of evidence. A paper only gives you one piece. So to see the integrative piece is a much different kind of skill set that they have to develop, and it's also a different way of understanding what they learn from the course. So it's changed my way of teaching completely by using e-portfolios. So I can't emphasize it more.
I think the student reflection that you have in the packet that I gave you serves some of that purpose. It's the integration. And now that we have an e-portfolio requirement, absolutely, I'm going to move in that direction. Right now I use Sakai for some of that kind of public presentation, and my students are pitching in front of a public audience, so I'm kind of moving it outside of the classroom, but I agree with you completely. I'm excited that we are finally moving. Some of our students on campus already have personal websites, or they put examples or samples of their work on a LinkedIn site or whatever, but I think the e-portfolio is going to allow us to do many different things and creative things, so I'm excited about it.
One of the things that I wanted to say, Richard, in relation to what you mentioned, sort of your characterizing of what, so what, then what, I do a lot of that also, and what I've found out over the course of years is that, that intentionality part of it, that this is not just an intellectual exercise, that there's a closure to it, that it's really meant to force you into a situation of coming up with solutions and develop. And we do a lot of that in business, of course, problem solving and and making decisions and all that intentionality. As I've seen, we did not just busy work. It was just not busy work, but it was something, some tangible product out of it. So.
Yeah, I think that structured intentionality is so important for reflection, and if we haven't crafted the reflection activities in a way that allows them to develop that reflective expertise, it's something that's academically rigorous. It's not just, when you use the word reflection, some students don't understand what that means, but it's a highly advanced cognitive skill, particularly to reflect on your own assumptions. So it's one thing to reflect on information that's presented to you, which they more or less mastered by the time they get to college. But then to ask them to reflect on assumptions or an ill-structured problem somebody that doesn't have an answer, their assumptions could be false. They could be distorted, and they're always, all of our assumptions are distorted in some way or another. But to learn how to do that and then look at the assumptions of somebody else, these are really highly difficult tasks to do, and then to kind of understand the sources of a particular set of assumptions is also really complicated. So I would not take, reflection isn't something to be taken lightly. It's something that really needs to be structured, and it should have some sequence and some framework attached to it. Then you can actually say, how can I assess whether or not they have highly skilled reflective abilities? And by having a framework, it helps you do that. Like, have they really improved the way that they observe? Often I'll send a student to a context, I'll bring him back, and I'll say, give me one quotation of a community member, just one.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that.
They won't. I mean, I could send 50 students out there, and unless I've intentionally structured a reflective activity so that they're thinking about how students say things, even if I ask about nonverbals, so if I haven't given them some guidelines on how to think about observation, there's no guarantee that they're actually even really systematically
We'll tell
observing
you
a
that. They'll
context.
surprise you.
Oh yeah.
The group
no,
of students I took to McCormick.
But I don't leave it to chance.
Yeah.
I don't just
That's
say
good.
go out and observe.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, and I think that's what you're pointing out, Ormos, is that having some sort of framework, to guide them in their reflection is really important. The weeklies shouldn't just be tell me your thoughts.
I find that they actually listen more if the community partner are people in their age group. Because when we went out to McCormick, my students came back and they said, what did you hear? And the one said, one of the residents said, we feel like people listen, but we're not heard. And they actually used the term heard as the description of the project. It became the name of the project. And so I do find sometimes our students listen in ways that maybe we don't.
Oh yeah. But
hear.
let them
But
be
you're
able to
right.
describe
Give
that
them,
and get it out
Give them
there.
tools to be able to do that.
Definitely. So,
I got your notes.
so the next session will be on community partnerships, and we've got some exciting things to show you. So hopefully you'll have time to come to the next one. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.